Welcome everybody. Hi, Charlene's joined us, and Maura, and Ken, and Cora. Cora, thank you so much for arranging for the Congressman to be here. Hi, Debbie. Hi, Tamina. We are still gathering, so we'll get started in a minute. I'm just going to do my usual, put people on the spot, ask them how they're doing. Um, so, um, there's a lot to cover today. Obviously, huge progress, right? Since we had a task force meeting in January, the passage of the American Rescue Plan is a really big deal, and getting money out to the counties and the cities is a really big deal. And according to the National Association of Counties, Contra Costa is set to get, I have to look down to read this number, 223,719,264 bucks. And so, one of the things we're going to end up talking about is how to advise them on how to spend that money. And so we'll get to that. But I am excited to welcome everybody for making the time. We still have folks joining us, and expect to have quite a good group gathered. Hi, Ruth. Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for making the time. So you'll see from our agenda today that we're going to do our usual kind of cover the economics early, and then we're going to split up into 3 breakout rooms. And our understanding of what's happening with the economy and what's been going on with the public support options for folks to deal with the short term, is certainly coming into starker relief now that we've had the American Rescue Plan. So we have this plan to go into breakout groups, and hopefully you took a minute to see what those descriptions are. And we have this meeting set up so that you'll be able to choose your own breakout room. But if for some reason your particular version of Zoom does not allow you to choose a breakout group, just unmute yourself, make a request, just say, I'd love to get into a certain group. And the magical team, Mark is the magic hand hosting this meeting for us, Mark Orcutt. So we'll make sure you get placed where you need to be. And thank you, Lindsay. You were you selected your group when you wrote back to me. So as in San Pablo EDC, Lindsay. We have multiple Lindsays on the call. So anyway, but then we're going to be joined by Congressman Mike Thompson. It's great to have the Congressman here to brief us himself. So our goal is to end the breakout rooms without doing a debrief so that we can go right to the Congressman at 9:30. Of course, if he ends up joining early or late, we'll make an adjustment there. But then the plan is, after the discussion of the American Rescue Plan, then we'll do a report out from the breakouts and then talk about what's next. So that's the game plan for our agenda. And so are there any quick questions? If you want to unmute yourself and just ask any questions about the agenda. Okay, well, we are a great group. It's so nice to see your faces, and thanks for sticking with us. So we'll just dive right in and start. Lindy and I are going to tag team a little bit on our economic update. And so we'll go ahead and get that started. So now I will say that these numbers will get updated for the February numbers will be available in 2 days time, right? So, but this is the most recent data that we have available. And so, there is a nice trend with respect to the employment rate as it looks by number, but there is not, but unfortunately, it's not what we want to see. So let me just dive into the numbers a little bit. So the California unemployment rate dropped 0.3 percentage points to 9.0 in January. But at the same moment, employers lost nearly 70,000 jobs. So then you had an adjustment from December, right? So there was a downward revised month over month loss of 75,400 jobs. So, and that was resulting from new methodology and data. But said another way, December and January combined for a 2-month total of 145,300 jobs lost in California, right? Which was largely due to the winter surge in COVID and renewed stay-at-home orders. So the states take on all this, right, is that California really has come back a long way. We've regained more than 39%, so obviously not quite 40% of the 2.7 million non-farm jobs that were lost during the pandemic a year ago, March and April. But we've got a long way to go with too many Californians and Contra Costans still out of work, and with their jobs not expected to return. So that's sobering. So then in terms of Contra Costa's unemployment rate, we've got 7.2% unemployment. And really what I like to focus in on is that unemployment number of 40,200. Lindy will cover some exciting plans from from Contra Costa Community College District in a minute, but that's a lot of folks to be concentrated on that we need to help compared to who was connected to employment pre-pandemic, right? So this is down from 7.9%. So this is trending in the right direction, but what we want to keep an eye on are the number of folks who've dropped out of the search for employment for a variety of reasons, because we want to make sure people don't stay disconnected from the workforce. So with this economic update, let's move on to talking about looking at understanding investments in goods versus services as we head towards herd immunity, right? So this first chart shows year over year retail sales, right? And this huge drop, okay? And then this big rebound. So we'll go on to the next slide. So if you drill down and you look at services consumption, and this is from our friends at Contingent Macro Advisors, much of the focus in the stock markets, which are up 17% since late January, since the new administration has been sworn in, much of the focus in the markets is on this pent-up demand for services, right? So much of California's economy, the East Bay's economy, the national economy is a service economy. So certainly service consumption is still down sharply, but it will bounce back significantly as people feel more comfortable traveling, staying in hotels, eating out, as the service industry, widely defined, and that includes, the nail salons, personal services, athletic options in terms of working out at gyms and that kind of thing, personal training. But often missed is just how much we want to think about consumers substituted services by spending money on goods during the pandemic, right? So in general, growth in goods spending has always been more volatile than services, but the volatility has just been remarkable in terms of this substitution, right? So if you look at goods consumption on the next slide, you see this huge growth in retail, in segments of the retail sales, right? So many are at retail levels. So looking at the goods components of personal consumption expenditures, which are broader than the retail sales report. So an analysis by Contingent Macro revealed that nearly every category is higher than last year based on using the 6-month average annualized amount. So if you're looking at January 2021 compared with January of 2020, so only gasoline, which is very significant. It goes without saying that's a huge thing for the Contra Costa economy, but gasoline and clothing are lower than a year ago, and clothing it's just barely. So, and all things home, right, related to home furnishings and cars really have really boomed in the economy. So that's just a look at goods and services. So then we wanted to take a little bit, there are a number of economists, whether it's the UCLA Anderson forecasts or others, that anticipate that 2021 will see record growth, 4.5+% growth rate once we reach full vaccinations and herd immunity. So, but I wanted to look at inflation. So looking at this first figure from a recent economic letter published by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, it's pretty clear that economists disagree about the inflation risks present in both the US and Europe. We're going to focus just on the US. So consumer price inflation in the US has declined since the onset of COVID in early 2020. It's rebounded more recently in recent months, but inflation remains below pre-pandemic levels. So in January, the US Consumer Price Index inflation rose at just 1.4% rate over the preceding 12 months. So the point of this chart is to show median short-term inflation forecast, right? So this is based on surveys of economists, okay? And so I just want to walk you through this. The average of the highest 25% of the forecast, right? The top quartile, and the average of the lowest 25%, the bottom quartile, right? And the median is what the solid line is, okay? And so the gap between the highest and the lowest, right, the vertical difference between those dashed lines, is the measure of dispersion of the forecasts, right? And the SFED points out that forecasters' views change over time, particularly during periods of increased economic turmoil, which we've experienced. And this gap captures changes in just how much the different economists disagree about inflation. So what does all this mean? I think it's actually important to look at the next slide, which is the long-term the long-term inflation expectations. And you'll see from this, there's a lot less dispersion, right? So here we have a representation of survey respondents' take on inflation in the US for the next 6 to 10 years, right? So according to the SFED, in the US, the median long-term inflation forecast has remained relatively unchanged since the onset of the pandemic, suggesting that there's some fundamentals about long-term expectations that are, in the terms of economics parlance, well anchored, right? So they're well justified, and there seems to be a lot of consensus around that. Now, there's a caveat. So the fiscal stimulus and accompanying growth in federal debt in response to the effects of the pandemic, right? We're here largely going to talk about the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, are not yet captured in these survey results. So, we're going to need to kick the tires and see if this, once those things get baked in. But the bottom line for all of this is that this stability indicates that risks to inflation in the long run are balanced in the view of the economists that get surveyed about such things. So not to get too wonky on all of you, but I thought it was important because expectations are, inflation expectations are on folks' mind. So anyway, I want to pass it over to Lindy to talk about what's going on at the state and locally and some important developments. Lindy.
Hi, excuse me, good morning, everyone. You can go ahead and go to the next slide for me. Okay, so here at the state, there was a bit of a concern earlier in the pandemic about what the impact would be on the state budget. We even had some conversations coming out of the state legislature and certainly from the governor about program cuts and really trying to prepare people, especially just recognizing that people's incomes were certainly being impacted. However, as we've seen, there's been a little bit of an unexpected impact on the stock market. Part of that, obviously, the result of these large stimuluses that the federal government has done. So the result of that is that the state has an excess revenue of $14.3 billion. There's still an ongoing conversation, and many are saying that we should expect in the years to come, we will not see this. But for this year, this is what we're dealing with. So the governor has looked at that, made some suggestions about how some of those funds would be spent. There's a lot of conversation specifically around homeless funding, for example. But the news is that for right now, the state budget is in a very good place. Again, we don't know if that will continue for years to come. The general consensus is that it will not, and that we'll be in a position of having to think about cuts. But for this year, that is not where the state budget is, and therefore the governor is making suggestions about where some of this funding can go. It's obviously some ongoing conversations. One of our local state legislators, Nancy Skinner, will be very involved in that conversation, as she's very involved in the budget process at the legislative level. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, but this is the position that we're currently in. Next slide. So we wanted to talk a little bit as well about what's happening in the community college space, especially as they play such an important role during points of recession. As you can see in this chart here, and it's a little unclear, but the points that are high, where you see those little gray dots, those represent recession points here in our local economy. And what you see from that is that during those times, community college district-wide enrollment significantly increases. So our community college here in Contra Costa County, often referred to as 4CD, is preparing for that and thinking about that. Our sister organization, the East Bay Leadership Council, did a task force last week with the new chancellor, Brian Reese. he came on and talked a lot about his priorities around enrollment and particularly around reducing barriers to enrollment. He's even going as far as trying to see if we can almost auto-enroll most of those who are unemployed into the community college system to decrease enrollment or the having to enroll as a barrier. He's also concentrating on some other populations, including former foster youth and veterans, and really trying to look at how we increase enrollment, particularly around Contra Costa Community College, which is in the west part of our county. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, but East Bay Leadership Council is excited to be supportive, and certainly it's something worth talking about here at this task force as well, as we know that our community colleges will likely be heavily leaned on by those who are thinking about what their next move might be, or possibly even looking at a new career path as a result of being displaced during the pandemic. So Kristen, can I hit on this one too?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, so many of you probably saw that Oakland has announced a Oakland Resilient Families project. This is modeled a little bit after what we saw recently completed in Stockton, which is one of the reasons that we're really excited that former Mayor Tubbs is going to be a speaker at our next convening to talk a lot about what this looked like, how they were able to do it, and what they learned from the project. Oakland is following in their footsteps, but with a much larger project. It'll actually be the largest guaranteed income pilot in the country. And 600 randomly selected people, I put some of the qualifiers there, but I'm not going to read through the whole thing, are going to be selected, and they'll receive $500 a month for at least 18 months. So it'll be really kind of a fascinating experiment in some senses, because we're going to see a little bit of a more strict guideline as to who qualifies. In this particular case, you have to have at least one child at home. And it'll be, I think, really a first of its kind look, both at how people spend that money, though they won't be required to report that. They will be asked to voluntarily participate in surveys and information, but also in what it does for those families and what their reflections on that period of time was. So looking forward to hearing more about this, and certainly talking more to former Mayor Tubbs when he joins us on April 19th.
Okie dokie. So here we go. We're going to do some breakout groups to keep our work moving forward. And so, as I mentioned, you should have the ability to go down and select from the breakout rooms to choose room 1, which is about paid internship support, and the questions listed there. Room 2 will be about supporting working families, right? So this is to help us fill in the other components beyond having Michael Tubbs be, our keynote for that supporting, for that convening, right? Because there's this link to improving economic mobility if you can cut down or end child poverty, and there's a connection there. So we're excited to be able to build a dynamic convening. I know the Lesher Foundation is interested in being involved. So that'll be room 2. And then room 3, we called Finishing Strong. So what issues would you like us to tackle in the next 3 months? What topics would you like us to cover? And how can we catalyze action at all levels and across sectors? So go ahead and take a minute to select your breakout room. And if any of you is having trouble, let us know if you are having trouble selecting your breakout room. And we will get you where you need to go. So we're going to go ahead and thank you, Letty. Yeah, just load up the chat if you can't select yourself, and we will get you where you need to go. And then the plan is we're going to just end the breakout groups when the Congressman joins us, so that we can go right into the briefing about the American Rescue Plan. Lindy, are you back?
I am. Hello, Congressman Thompson. It's such a pleasure to have you here. I appreciate you agreeing to join us. Really quickly, Congressman Thompson represents the 5th Congressional District, which includes Napa, parts of Contra Costa, Lake, Solano, and Sonoma. So he's got a lot to cover and a lot to think about. He was first elected in 1998, and prior to that, he was part of our state Senate. He was actually the chair of the Budget Committee there, and represented the 2nd District, excuse me. So thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you. Thanks very much. Cora said that you wanted me to talk a little bit about the American Rescue Plan. Is that correct? Yeah. Well, most of this is all in public space right now, and I'm sure that you're all pretty well aware of what it does and how it impacts you. But it's best, I think, broken down if you look at the different planks of the measure. First being and look at it in the context of the pandemic and the fact that the pandemic has two sides to it. It has a healthcare side and an economic side. And I think everyone understands that we've got to crush the healthcare side if we're going to deal with the economic side. And that's what this bill, sets out to do. The first plank would be the shots in the arm plank. Tremendous amount of money designated to ensure that we've got more vaccines and that we have a more coordinated program. One of the problems when this all started, not when it all started, but when we finally got vaccines, that people really didn't understand how they could get in line to get one, or just a lot of confusion. So there's money in it for additional vaccines, and there's money in it for a better way by which to communicate with people, so people know what's going on and how they can get in line quicker and get their vaccines quicker. We're doing about 2.5 million vaccines a day right now, which is a pretty big bump in where we were, and it's fairly regular that we get over 3 million a day. We've reached 100 million shots, and that's 59 days into this administration, which has been, I think, pretty remarkable. There's still some kinks. There's things that have to be worked out, but I think all the attention is focused on that now, so that's a good thing. And the second plank would be putting money in people's pockets to deal with the economic side of the pandemic. And the stimulus checks are going out now. In fact, they started, I think, the day after the bill was signed into law. People were starting to get their checks. $1,400 for everyone making less than $75,000 a year, $150,000 per family. There's also a temporary increase in the child tax credit from $2,000 per child to $3,000 per child, and $3,600 for kids under 6. Interestingly, and I think important, is the fact that all of the economists tell us that this bill, in large part because of the child tax credit, a refundable child tax credit, that this bill will reduce by half the rate of child poverty. And I believe that all of us, elected office, public sector, private sector, every human being should be looking at things as to how it improves the life and the future of children. Every kid should have the same opportunity that we got, and by halving the child poverty rate, I think that is a pretty doggone good start. There's also the idea of getting kids back to school. Everybody agrees this is important. If you're a parent who's been at home with your kids, as much as you love them, you think it's really important that those kids go back to school. And don't feel guilty about that, because if your kid is stuck at home with you, they really want to get back to school too. So, but there's so much benefit to being able to be in school, to socialize with your peers, participate in all the school activities. So the bill has about $130 billion to help schools reopen safely. And this includes everything from better equipping schools with PPEs to improving ventilation systems and dealing with the spacing issue, class size issues that impact the ability to stay now 3 feet away in school. And there's also, this money can also be used to make up lost time. A lot of kids are going to have to go to summer school or things of that nature, and this money will help do that. And then the last plank is the state and local side of this. You know, that was a big fight in the last relief bill that we had. There are our colleagues on the other side of the aisle did not want to help state and local governments. And state and local governments have been on the tip of the spear in this COVID fight, and their resources have been stretched. And state and local governments, unlike the federal government, can't deficit finance. So if a state and local government runs out of money, the only thing they can do is, I guess they could raise taxes, but that's going to be that takes a lot of time to do. Plus, it's a pretty heavy lift in the middle of a pandemic. Or you cut services and lay off employees. And I would argue that the last thing that we need during a pandemic is to reduce public services or fire employees. If you do that, you've got higher unemployment costs, which cost us, more in taxes. And who is it that would be laid off? Who are these employees? They're teachers, they're firefighters, cops, healthcare providers, local government personnel that deliver critical services that are probably needed even more during a pandemic. So that would really penalize the people that government are supposed to be serving. And then the other thing that it does is it takes money out of the pockets of these public employees. And that means they've got less money to spend in our local communities, so our businesses suffer even more. So that government, state and local government component, I believe, was very, very important. For Contra Costa County, it's going to be about $223 million to the state, county and local governments, or county and city governments. So it's an important component that will help a lot. So that's pretty much what the bill does, and I kind of feel like people are a bit more positive now that we passed this, and that in conjunction with the improvements in the rollout of the vaccines, I think the communities are feeling much better about things. I pulled into my office. I'm in my Napa office right now. I pulled in this morning, and out in the parking lot of my office, County of Napa is setting up all the stuff needed to do vaccines today. So they're gonna be given shots, and I'm sure that if I was down in Contra Costa or over in Solano or up in Lake or over in Sonoma, I would see the same thing. So I think things are improving, and I'm hopeful that we get through this. And the next time I get to see your smiling faces, it's in person.
Excellent. Well, we would love that too. Just if it's okay to ask a couple of follow-up questions, Congressman Thompson.
Absolutely.
So I really do, and I think everyone on this call cares deeply about cutting poverty. I mean, what we're here trying to do is to create a more equitable and sustainable economy for the county. And so cutting childhood poverty in half is a very big deal. And so, but the child tax credits are temporary, right? And so do you have any sense about whether or not, so I have sort of two questions related to childhood issues. So, you mentioned the $130 billion for schools, which will be handed out on a Title I basis. But I was curious if you could talk about any funding. We've got some really top childcare leaders on this call. And so what about the funding for childcare, and if there's anything in the bill? And then also what your thoughts about extending the child tax credit?
Well, there are a bunch of provisions in the bill that I didn't drill down on. There's money for childcare. There's money for rental assistance. Right. So there's a lot in here. I know I've talked to someone the other day. I think it was the Martinez Kiwanis.
Oh, good. My dad runs that.
but they and I mentioned to them that that there was $225 million going to the county and the state, and someone said, well, I just did the math on that. That works out to whatever it was, $15 per person. I thought we were getting something from this thing, and I said, well, wait, there's rental assistance, there's COBRA, there's a number of different things in the bill.
Subsidies for enrollment on the exchanges, there's all kinds of stuff for
So this is only the money that goes to the government. And as far as the making permanent or extending even further the child tax credit stuff, we know that this is important. We know how much it helps, but and there's legislation to do it. I certainly support it. The question is, can we get there, and how do we get there? As you know, right now there's a lot of discussion on in regard to infrastructure, and I don't know if you read any of the articles today, but different congressional leaders believe that infrastructure is a different thing for different communities of interest. So childcare is and our child tax credits are certainly important personal infrastructure for individuals. But when you start adding that all up, it gets real expensive.
Yeah.
And the more you add, the less support you have for the total package. And that's the discussion that's happening right now. So if a lot of this and probably child tax credits fall into this category, it would be something that would have to be done by reconciliation. So you wouldn't have a lot of support on because you wouldn't have a lot of support on the other side. So that's why there's discussion now about doing a smaller infrastructure bill, and then getting a bipartisan win, and then following that up with reconciliation to do some of these other things. But we're far from there. We're far from where we need to be right now. Now there's a Republican in the Senate who wants to extend the child tax credit. That's Mitt Romney.
Mitt Romney, yeah.
But as you know, his pay for is a little tough to swallow. Yeah. But at least he's considering it, and so maybe that's a start of something.
Right. Is it okay? Do we have time to ask any other questions? I don't want to keep you too long. Is there a chance maybe one question?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, perfect.
Depends how hard it is.
Oh, well, we're a good audience. We're a good audience. You already saw Debbie Toth was lauding the county for their vaccine rollout in Contra Costa. It's nice that it's down to age 50. It's just pretty phenomenal how quickly things have changed. I trust this group. You are a good group. If you have a question for Congressman Thompson, you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it. Anyone? Don't be bashful, because I have 26 more questions. I'm just trying to give you all a chance. Anybody?
I have a comment. But it's not really a question, but it's, I noticed how, when you started talking about separating the health piece from the economic piece. And what's become more apparent to me is that it's really hard to separate, because our community's health is really dependent upon the economy, and the economy is really dependent upon our health status, especially for early childhood. So I think in going forward, what's helpful for leadership to be able to do is help us prioritize how we can, the overlap piece of those two components, because I really don't think we'll have a successful rollout or improvement of our economy if the health issues aren't directed, directed. And that's not particularly just about vaccines. It also includes, like the telehealth component. There's good things that we learned during the pandemic about telehealth, which can help reduce our costs, but we have low-income people who don't necessarily have access to that. So how do you improve their situation so they can go to work, they can stay healthy, they can provide for their family? And then the second part I just had a concern about, even though this may pull kids out of poverty, it feels like it still is going to be more of a temporary fix unless we have more permanent solutions. So there's a group of some families are right on the bubble. So, I don't know if this additional funds will kind of push them out of eligibility for other support, which makes it kind of a zero-sum game for them. So those are just things I wanted to put out on the table. So it's not really a question, just more of a comment. Thank you.
Well, John, thank you. And you've made some very important points. And one that I'll talk about on the healthcare side, you mentioned telemedicine. And as you probably know, one of the previous bills, we put a provision, we adopted legislation that allowed Medicare recipients to have access to telehealth. And that was my bill. I do a lot of telehealth work in Congress. I started back when I was in the state Senate. I had the bill passed and signed into law, the first one in the country that allowed for non-face-to-face reimbursements to allow for telehealth. And I've been following up on that since going to Congress. And my bill was adopted, and it just proved wildly successful. The number of telehealth visits improved. It allowed people to get health care while in the safety of their home without exposing themselves to COVID. We've always kind of couched it as an issue to bring health equity, healthcare equity into underserved areas. But we're finding out now that it's not just underserved areas. People who have to balance work schedules with childcare schedules can use telehealth to do that. So I think you're going to see a lot more acceptance of telehealth, which will improve access to healthcare for a lot of people. The other thing that it showed folks is if you and I are on Medicare and you can use telehealth because in your area you have broadband and all the stuff necessary, but I'm up in the sticks someplace and I don't have broadband, I'm at a real healthcare disadvantage. And it really focuses on the inequities that are created because of a lack of broadband and a lack of technology access. Same thing happened with the distance learning. If you've got a kid at home trying to distance learn and you don't have broadband, your kid is getting a less of an education than the kid down the street who has access to all that stuff. So there's some things that we've learned because of the pandemic that I think we'll be able to. The truth is, probably everybody on this call already knew this stuff, and it's intuitive to a lot of us. But it really shows the skeptics that we're right.
Well, the whole thing required everyone to have a pace of change and to adapt in ways that I think are going to accelerate some of those trends. But so I'm looking at time. So thank you, John. Debbie Toth raised her hand. So Debbie, go ahead and ask your question.
I had to unmute myself. I couldn't find myself. Hi, Congressman Thompson. I'm very happy to see you.
Hi,
and I look forward to your fundraiser, I think that's coming up. I am here. I work for Choice in Aging. We're a nonprofit organization, and you have actually supported us in the past, and we appreciate that. I want to just really take a moment and highlight the fact that we all know that COVID-19 has impacted frail elders the most out of anybody, particularly those living in skilled nursing facilities. This relief package covers what are called home and community-based services. This is a first, recognizing that we want to bust the institutionally based poverty pipeline that is the system of aging in our nation. You spend everything you have and you end up in the costliest point of care for taxpayers, which is that skilled nursing facility. We saw what happens in those when we have infection and when we don't have regulations enforced. So I want to thank you for the recognition of that, but I also want to point out that there are other brokennesses in this system that are causing this problem. The increase in senior homelessness as a direct result of tax credited properties that only have a certain time horizon to keep the tax, to keep the rents low, to provide the incentives. Those are all ending now, and for-profit entities can come in and take over and charge higher rents, and people are becoming homeless. So we have this huge issue that's coming up that's going to cost taxpayers a ton of money, and it's going to be our children that are paying for it. So we have fixes that have to come in the system, and we can't just do this relief package and walk away. Sort of what Kristen was saying, like, how do we continue this work on these tax credits? Like, how do we continue? If we lose all the lessons we've learned in this process, we're broken. So how do we make sure that we capitalize on that moving forward in policy and budgeting? Thank you so much for the opportunity to comment.
Well, Debbie, thank you very, very much for that. And you're absolutely correct. You know, I talk to students a lot. And when I talk to students, I often tell them that government at any level, government does not solve problems. The government addresses problems, and you just hit on it. You know, we can identify a problem. Right now, we could collectively write a bill to deal with that problem. And before the ink is dry, we've got to come back and tune it up and deal with unexpected consequences, you know, et cetera. So you're right about that. We need to keep working on these things, and just because you get a victory today, you don't take it off the table and say, well, that's done. You know, let's move on to something else. You move on to something else, but you also have to keep an eye on that issue because things change, and nothing is forever. So you're absolutely right about that. And I'll just tell you that you know, I do the gun violence prevention stuff, yes, for the Democrats in Congress, and you know, been working a lot on that. And in the 116th Congress, the last Congress, the House passed my bill that would expand background checks. And at the end of the vote, we had planned to walk off the floor, walk down the steps in the back of the Capitol to have a press conference. You know, the entire Democratic caucus was invited, and the handful of Republicans that supported were invited also. And I was told to lead the group down the steps, and I walked down with a great friend of mine who sadly is no longer with us, Congressman John Lewis from Georgia. And John was getting frail, and he held my arm. We walked arm in arm down the steps out to the press conference. And another member was there, and she walked up next to John, and she said, you know, there's little likelihood that the Senate is going to pass this. You know, we've done our work, but the Senate's not going to do it. I'm terribly frustrated. What advice can you give me? And John looked at her and said, remember, young lady, keep your eye on the prize. So we've got to all do that. We've all got to keep our eye on the prize, and we're not done. We got a lot more work to do.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Congressman Thompson, and obviously your leadership on gun violence prevention is so important and timely and remains. So I do hope that you keep your eye on the prize and get your Senate colleagues to do the right thing, particularly after the last week that we've had. So I want to respect, Cora does awesome staff work for you all the time. And she has informed me that you are needed somewhere else at 10 o'clock. And I have the commitment to everyone on this call that they need to go somewhere else at 10 o'clock. So we're going to wrap things up. But if you could just unmute yourselves and please join me in thanking Congressman Thompson, and we will keep in touch and let you know what our recommendations are about how to build a better economy. So
Perfect.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I hope to see you in person real soon.
That'll be great.
Yeah.
Stay safe.
So in terms of just closing out our meeting, it's impossible to cover $1.9 trillion package, right? The biggest legislative proposal in my lifetime in 20 or 30 minutes. So, but I do want to respect our 10 o'clock closing time. So what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to email you out a very short article that was released on Monday, or actually it was released yesterday, from the Brookings Institution, the Metro program, right? My favorite brains that are working on equitable economic recovery, about what local leaders should do with their American Rescue Plan money, just to give you food for thought and keep, I know that in the group that we were talking about finishing strong, there's rapid fire, really good ideas. So what we couldn't do in person right now as a debrief, we will do via email, but just please plan on joining us at our next meeting, which will be on Wednesday, the fourth Wednesday of the month, April 28th, I think is the date. And so hope that you can plan on joining us between 9 and 10 while we recover more things. But Monday, April 19th is going to be our half-day convening featuring the keynote from former Stockton Mayor Michael Tubbs, who is now a special advisor on economic mobility to Governor Gavin Newsom. So I'm excited that he accepted our invitation and is going to help us with our work. So I don't want to hold you over. We all have so much important work to do. So you know how to get a hold of me. We'll put the slides up on the partnerships resource page for this work, and we'll just keep working. So thank you so much for all your invitations to collaborate and keep moving forward. Have a great day.